So, good morning, everyone. It's still morning, and welcome to our event here at the Nordic Pavilion. My name is Satu Santala. I'm the Managing Director of the Nordic Development Fund and a happy moderator for today's event. The Nordic Development Fund is a multilateral fund established by the 5 Nordic countries. So we are a multilateral fund that finances climate projects mainly in sub-Saharan Africa and other poorer countries. We both with the public sector and the private sector, and both adaptation and mitigation. Today, we wanted to focus our conversation on early stage catalytic finance because we believe that that's one area where we financiers really need to try to push forward to achieve both catalytic impact and also to create demonstration effect and create a pipeline of investments going forward. The Nordic Development Fund, we host an early stage fund called the Energy and Environment Partnership Africa Fund, which is an example of supporting early stage energy companies in Southern and Eastern Africa. And we're also at the moment co-creating with SIDA and other Nordic governments to support early stage innovations for adaptation, mitigation and biodiversity. That's ongoing work that we're looking at. For the Nordic Development Fund, we are a co-financier and we always work in partnership with others. So that's why for us today, we really wanted to pull together some of our good partners that we really appreciate working with and to share experiences together. So today's panel brings together an outstanding group of partners to engage in an in-depth discussion on how we mobilize catalytic finance for climate solutions. But before we get to our distinguished panel today, I would like to invite Hans Olaf Ibrecht, the Special Envoy for Climate and Security from Norway, to give us some opening remarks. Hans Olaf, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Satu. It's actually good to be back in the NDF crowd. That has always been one of my favorite acronyms. It's a good space to be in among the Nordics. We don't have too many disagreements among ourselves and we share the same values, so it's quite pleasant to be there. I've been on the board of the Nordic Development Fund before. I'm taking over now the Norwegian seat again as of 1st of November. In addition, I'm also serving on the Green Climate Fund. I can just tell you that it's a lot more challenging and difficult to be on the board of the GCF compared to being on the board of the NDF, and I've also been on the Adaptation Fund for a long time. So if you have any complaints or difficulties to get access to funds and resources, you can take it up with me because I'm the culprit behind many of these complicated procedures that we have internationally, but not alone though. But I've been asked to talk a little bit about early stage financing for climate solutions and the role that NDF is playing. So I'm going to take this maybe a couple of notches up and refer then to what we agreed to in Baku last year, the NCQG as they call it. So there are two numbers coming out of that decision, the 300 billion or at least 300 billion and then at least 1.3 trillion. And of course, the last one is coming from all public and private sources. We all know that the needs for climate finance are quite huge. And I've come to realize that in this business, I hardly trust a figure that I'm seeing in terms of all the needs, because I think we can all agree that it's under trillions, but how many trillions there are actually different numbers being used out there. But the backdrop here is, of course, that we are short of funds, and that's being discussed in all pavilions at this COP. We also see that now ODA is under pressure. Last year, ODA dropped about 9%, and we expect a 9 to 17% drop in ODA this year. So this will amount to about 25% drop in ODA in 2025. And of course, that sends a serious message to all of us and also to the COP in terms of that we can expect cuts in climate finance going forward. And that's why it's so important for us that we use the scarce resources that we have in a most catalytic manner to crowd in as much resources from the private sector as possible. The Baku to Belém roadmap was presented a few days ago, and there will be a high-level meeting, I think, today or tomorrow, where there will be a ministerial dialogue on the Baku to Belém roadmap. And I'm actually been looking at this roadmap, and there are 5 R's that are being used there. And I'm going to try to then put the Nordics and the NDF into this roadmap. It's the first one is replenishing, in terms of focusing on grants and concessional finance. The second is rebalancing, focusing on fiscal space and debt sustainability. The third one is rechanneling, transformative private finance and affordable cost of capital. Fourth is revamping, and that's focusing on capacity and coordination of scaled portfolios. And the fifth one is reshaping systems and structures for capital flows. And when you look at this, I feel that maybe replenishing and rechanneling, it's where the NDF and the Nordic governments figure quite squarely into. Replenishing, the Nordic countries are large providers of climate finance, and we provide grants. We are large providers of capital to the vertical climate environment funds, be it GCF, the GEF or the Adaptation Fund, and then to NDF. We also share a seat in most of the MDBs together, so we are an active voice for reforms in the MDB system. And we need them to work together to optimize the balance sheet, and we are also providing hybrid capital to the MDBs to increase their lending activities. In terms of IDA 21 and ADF 17, I think we also are sharing the same priorities. We are also key proponents of carbon pricing, and of course Article 6 cooperation will be central to all of us. In terms of rechanneling, and I think that's where the catalytic and early stage finance fits most squarely into, because then there are calling for increased development of risk mitigation instruments. The DFIs are of course key to providing equity, and there's always and then guarantees. And it's always a discussion whether we should provide equity or guarantees. And I think it depends on the markets where we are operating. In some markets, of course, we need risk equity first before we can start using guarantees. In other markets, there is already equity, and then we can use guarantees more efficiently. Yesterday, I think it was yesterday, we launched the adaptation window in IMCA, which was again an example of a great collaboration among the Nordics and originally also the USAID. We also launched a joint guarantee between Norway, Sweden, and Denmark last week through IDB. We provided 200 million in guarantees that would unleash 800 million in IDB investments for energy in the Amazonia. So combined with the Nordics and together with NDF, we have actually a comprehensive and large toolbox that we can deploy efficiently together. And I think actually if you look at the toolbox among many other countries, I think we are very well equipped and positioned to work together and deploying our capital as efficiently as possible. So with those words, I feel that NDF and the Nordics, we can definitely contribute actively to implementing the Belém to Baku to Belém roadmap. And of course, we are also providing input into the other activities in terms of rebalancing, increasing fiscal space. And that's again a shared commitment from the Nordic countries that we focus on domestic resource mobilization. I think we are one of the few ones that have a clear focus on domestic resource mobilization. And I'm always saying, at events like this, you can come to Norway or Denmark, I think Sweden and Finland also. We are world champions in taxation, so you can come to us and learn how to tax people and corporations. And I think that actually underpins whatever we are doing, because unless the people and corporations, private sector in the developing countries, they have to pay for this. It's not a free sum for them. So they need to get their own domestic systems in place, because that could unleash everything in terms of the Baku Belém roadmap as well. So with those words, it's been great to try to kick you off a little bit in discussions. I think NDF is well positioned. I would, from my side, would like to see a much larger NDF, but it is a risk-taking organization, and then the rest of the acronym jungle need to work actively with the NDF to scale up some of the promising solutions. So, thank you.
Thank you, Hans-Ola, for kicking us off and for really linking our discussions with the bigger picture of climate finance and the negotiations as well. And I really liked your sort of thinking around how the different Nordic tools in the toolbox can work together to achieve more, and NDF being one of those. Okay, but then moving forward in our program, and I would like to welcome our wonderful panel. So please take your seats on the stage. We have Sashi Jayatileke, who is the Senior Director at the World Climate Foundation for IMCA, the Investment Mobilization Collaboration Alliance. I always have to think every word. Also, Louise Harman, who is the lead policy specialist for environment and climate at SIDA, Sweden. And also Stacey Swan, who is the managing director and division chief for blended finance at IDB Invest. So let's get started, dear panelists. And first, I wanted a quick round from all of you, sharing some of your experiences in creating impact through early stage catalytic finance and to support innovations and SMEs. Can you share some examples and experiences from successful approaches? And maybe we'll just start in order here. Do you want to go first?
Happy to. Thanks, Satu. Thank you for having me.
And we have to
yes.
speak super
Let me
loud.
practice. Okay. So I want to share a little bit from my...
That mic doesn't work well. Try this one.
Okay, this is much better. Thanks. As you know, Satu, I am recent to this role as a Senior Director at IMCA, because IMCA was founded by USAID, my prior employer, and I learned a lot of what I know about what works in early stage financing from working there. And I wanted to just share like 3 things that I think over the years really showed me the way that you can be catalytic when we talk about SME innovation and early stage financing. So one area I would really focus on is being patient. I think working in this space where risk has not been defined clearly, it's often perceived risk, you need to have patience, and that's why we call it patient capital. This is really much harder than I thought. Okay, I'll hold it like this. And what does that mean? It means capital that's risk tolerant, and I feel like we've learned if we just have the same old structures and the same box of DFIs doing the same thing that they've always done, like all the banks, we're not moving the needle forward. So how can we be patient, allow longer term loans, and even rates that might not have the same returns? And for that, you need blended finance, which NDF does well. The second is that it's actually not a product, blended finance, it's a process. And that process can be messy, and it takes a lot of collaboration and understanding and transparency in that process to be able to educate people of the fact that it doesn't happen overnight, because you're mixing a lot of different types of funding into a capital stack. And as you know, that can take time. And often you need to mainstream frameworks into that process, frameworks that are being developed right now around climate and physical risk. And I think that enables us to put together the right structure that allows for an appropriate product. And lastly, I would say additionality. And what does additionality mean? It means that we're taking risk, and sometimes we can actually fail. And if we are not seeing failures in our work, then I think we're not taking enough risk. And I have to say, I'm really proud of the fact that I worked on transactions that failed, because that's how I know when I was at USAID, I was actually doing something that was additional. And if we're getting only results, and this is for all the people who count the dollars, like, let some failure happen, because that's where you'll see the market gets moved. And just one example of a success, not a failure, would be the Amazon Biodiversity Fund that was put together in 2019. It took about 3 years of working together for us to be able to launch that. And as a result, today, now, there are more than ever private investors coming into the Amazon for the bioeconomy and SMEs. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a great example. And thanks also for highlighting the easiness of blended finance. And I think, of course, we all need to also recognize from the messiness to physical blendedness. But still, building that trust over very different layers is a key component there. So then moving to Louise, what experiences would you like to share?
I would I will highlight one of our mechanisms which we use, and it's the challenge funds that we find very successful mechanism to support early stage innovation and solutions that are critical to climate mitigation and adaptation. Since the challenge funds really allows for tailored support to entrepreneurs for best solutions to a specific problem or a context through competitive measures. And in our experience, for catalytic support to be successful in terms of impact, it's really critical with technical assistance and investment facilitation support to the enterprises besides the grants. This means hands-on support to innovators to become bankable and link these innovators to investors. In that, because otherwise it's very difficult to go to scale. Another critical point is supporting the investors or the innovator to develop end-user financing. So it's about really getting out solutions that are affordable and accessible to our target groups. And I want to highlight a challenge fund, which is the Water and Energy for Food. And it has actually managed to reduce 2.6 million tons in CO2. It has saved more than 20 billion liters of water, produced 16 million tons of food, and reached 6 million small-scale farmers in Southeast Asia and Africa. And this has been supported through, or I would say that the innovators are from different sectors, but so one is an example of, for example, symbiotic fungi that increase the plant's water stress tolerance to where the crops required 50% less water, to affordable solar irrigation pumps, to smallholder farmers, and permaculture cultivation approach to increase carbon sequestration and reduce dependence on synthetic fertilizers. So to come to an end, I would say that this fund has mobilized 210 million US dollars in private capital. And this is by supporting the innovators, getting investment ready, and brokering the investees' contacts. And the total donor support amounted to approximately 100 million. So it's quite a significant sum mobilized.
Thank you, Louise. And thanks for those examples. And thank you for taking us from kind of the abstract to the very concrete, all the way to the kinds of results on the ground. And then moving to you, Stacy.
Yes, can you hear me? No. Is this one on? No. Not my voice this time. Is this on? All right, there we go. And I will do this. I will do much closer. I am losing my voice. It's much better than it was yesterday, but you can hear me, so that's good. Maybe I'll step back and give a little bit of an overview of IDB Group. I am the Managing Director of Blended Finance at IDB Invest. IDB Invest is the private sector arm of IDB. IDB has a public sector arm, obviously. Its main organization, it does public sector financing. It also has IDB Lab, which is an organization that funds early stage venture. And I think for this conversation, it's important to understand what we did at IDB to set that up was really prescient in understanding that the funding needs to match, the funding ecosystem needs to match the business ecosystem, right? The business ecosystem is big companies, listed companies, big assets, infrastructure, medium-sized companies, small and medium-sized companies, small entrepreneurs, but also startups. And there's a difference between an SME and a startup, and that's very important when we come to talking about how blended finance is used to support the part of the ecosystem that's at the small scale. And I don't mean that to be, to mean that they can't be large, because most entrepreneurs I know and small businesses want to be large. It just means that the funding that we can provide for smaller organizations needs to match and meet the place that those organizations are. So going back to blended finance and how that can be useful. For most SMEs, we do a number of projects and programs that support SMEs through other financial intermediaries at IDB Invest. We have one, the Amazonia Forever initiative is channeling funding all the way into through a multifaceted ecosystem of financiers to local smallholder farmers and SMEs. We also, at IDB Lab, provide patient equity to startups. So a startup is probably not sufficient or not conducive to a debt product, right? SMEs, there's a whole ecosystem of debt financing for SMEs in all parts of the world. But for startups, when you're building a company, equity and patient equity is really, really important. And that's something that IDB Lab does. IDB Lab also helps build the ecosystem of accelerators to help startup companies bring their ideas to fruition, to help those companies grow. And that's something that is pretty innovative, I think, in the MDB system. There aren't very many other MDBs that are doing that early stage, more venture-like support under the same umbrella. Oftentimes they'll fund managers that would do that, or they will fund incubators and accelerators that will do that. But IDB was prescient many years ago to establish FOMIN and then what became IDB Lab. We also, at IDB Invest, have boot camps for first-time fund managers that are doing small-scale intervention in our markets in Latin America. That's pretty innovative, too. We're training the fund managers who are going to be then investing in the small companies, and we're providing the technical assistance to build that capacity. And then if they are, if they do well, we then kind of back them with equity investments into their funds, which is very interesting. It's a nice way to kind of pass the baton. And I could say a bunch more, but I'll stop here.
Thank you, Stacy, and I really like your what you said about the funding ecosystem needing to really match the business ecosystem, and it's also true for climate finance as it is for all other finance, and really like your examples of different types of financing and other support that business ecosystem needs. All right, then let's go to a second round of quick questions. I'll start with you again, Sashi. Can you talk to us a little bit about IMCA and the collaboration that it is. You already mentioned it earlier. Can you also talk about some of IMCA's experiences, and in particular the upcoming call for proposals related to adaptation in Africa?
Thank you, Satu. Yeah, so IMCA was started about 3 or 4 years ago when we realized that we were all putting out calls for proposals around the same time for very similar, essentially, requests for innovation in climate. And this was when I was at USAID. We recognized that asset managers were having to go through and actually submit applications over the course of 1 year, maybe 3, 4, 5, and that really takes a lot of time from them, and at the end of the day, for us, in due diligence and review. So we came together as a collaboration in COP27 to say maybe we can work together on this and share certain objectives in order to make it easier to accelerate essentially blended finance for what we're talking about today, early stage catalytic capital. So from COP27, when we had essentially all of the Nordic countries, Finland, Sweden, Norway, Denmark, and Iceland, come together for this announcement, we started with the adaptation finance window last year, 2 years ago, in which we got 50 proposals. At that time, 50 proposals for adaptation finance was unheard of because people told us that wouldn't be possible, that you couldn't get fund managers focused on this. And we showed that they could. So we realized that there is a demand, and when you signal that there's grant capital, there's first loss, there's guarantees, and I will save you the boring definition of all of these because that you can find anywhere, but essentially it's the most flexible source of capital you can find. That when you come together as a partnership with shared objectives, you build a way of structuring an instrument for investment management that are actually bespoke, but we do it together. And so one big takeaway from IMCA has been that collaboration builds credibility and confidence in the market. And then, so when we now are issuing our third call for proposals, which we launched on Wednesday here at COP, for adaptation finance in Africa, we expect to see even more concepts because we've already signaled to the larger market that this is an area where early stage capital will be made available up to 40 million euro, which is 46 million US dollars, as well as a lot of philanthropic support observing what we're doing, essentially making it very simple for an asset manager to test out a new strategy in something as complicated as adaptation in Africa. So.
And then moving to Louise. SIDA has very successfully financed innovation and SME in sectors like renewable energy through innovative programs, as you mentioned earlier. And now you're also looking to boost innovations related to adaptation and biodiversity. Can you tell us a little bit why these areas are a focus for you?
Yeah, for us, climate adaptation, I mean, it's key for people living in poverty, and that's SIDA's mandate. And as climate impacts deepen, and it's increasingly clear that societies need to adapt to changing climate. And at the same time, biodiversity underpins climate resilience. And healthy ecosystems are critical for water, food, energy security. In other words, it's central for livelihoods and health and economic opportunities in the long term. Therefore, we all need to find ways and solutions that can conserve and restore ecosystems through nature-based solutions, sustainable land use, and circular business models. So, for example, innovative local entrepreneurs, as well as enterprises from Nordic countries, could be key drivers. Many critical solutions actually are unimplemented or underutilized, and due to key constraints with underfinancing of climate adaptation and biodiversity restoration, particularly when compared to mitigation efforts. So that's why we think that it's very important to continue and do that.
Thanks, Louise. Yes, that's very compelling. Okay, then it's Stacey's turn. IDB Invest has also long-standing experience in channeling partner organizations' concessional resources to private sector investments in Latin America and the Caribbean. Can you tell us a little bit about some of the key challenges, but also success factors in structuring these partnerships?
Yeah, so I am 3 months on the job. I became managing director in August, and I've spent my first 3 months on a bit of a listening tour, trying to figure out what's our portfolio, how our process works, where our teams are, what they do, and I'm amazed, frankly, at how well IDB Invest has been able to both manage, mobilize the resources for blended that it has, but also manage in a very high quality and high fiduciary way. We structure our blended capital, our blended investment capital alongside IDB Invest in ways that can be catalytic and additional. Those are things that all the MDBs and all the channels of blended finance do. Let me pull up my data points because I will miss them otherwise. So we have since we started the blended finance department, we've funded 120 projects. Oh my gosh, that just went away. There it goes. Of that, those funds have leveraged $23 billion. So that's a lot of leverage that we're getting. And it's partly because of the discipline in how our investment officers are pricing, sizing, and structuring the funding that we have. Obviously, leverage comes in different shapes and sizes depending on whether it's infrastructure or through financial services. But that's a pretty impressive number for the 12 years that the institution has been doing this, right? Of that, we like to say that we've got about 30% of the concessional resources going to Latin America at this point. I think that number changes every year as more entities get involved in channeling resources and as the ecosystem of development finance banks and institutions are built out locally. That's very, very important in my mind. We need banks on the ground doing the same job that we're doing. And it's actually not only developmental, but a sign of success if we're able to build that ecosystem of blended finance investors and banks and bankers all the way down to the ground. Our goal is really to help build that kind of ecosystem and share our resources in that way. We also see our role as really needing to step up. So on the lessons learned and where we need to improve, step up on speed, not step up on volume. We need to be faster to meet this moment. At IDB Invest, we have a number of new managing directors in the organization. Many of them came from the outside and came from the banking sector. And all of us are aligned on improving our processing time and getting our funding out the door quite quickly at still a high level of diligence. I have not yet, because I'm only 3 months in the job, I've not yet seen a full cycle of an investment, and we're also at the end of our financial year, so there's a lot of projects that are coming through now. But I know that many of my colleagues are looking to do things in halftime, and that means we need to do things in halftime. And that also is music to my ears, because I don't think we solve the climate crisis by sitting on money or talking about it. I think we solve the climate crisis by investing. And bringing it back to the adaptation and resilience topic, everything has a climate risk. Every sector, every asset, every company, every single thing in our pipeline, I can go to and say, if we ask the right questions and we assess it in the right way, I can find something that might be risky or at risk because of the warming planet. So from my perspective, and by the way, we don't have to use a lot of blended for that, right? We still use our blended to be additional, but this is just good investment business. And our colleagues are starting to kind of understand this. We just had Hurricane Melissa in the region. We have a all hands on deck approach to reconstruction and rebuilding, and where it makes sense, a private sector arm of IDB will be there, and where it makes sense, the blended finance resources will also be there to do this fast, right? To build that resilience quickly.
Thank you. Thanks for those insights, and I really like your call for like stepping up on both scale and speed and really doing this seriously. Look, we are very close to the end of our time here this morning, but I wanted to go one more round and ask, we are 10 years into the Paris Agreement. We keep on hearing about the urgency. And we also keep hearing about the challenges of mobilizing resources, and like Hans Olaf earlier said, it's not an easy task. So it would be easy to be pessimistic, but we choose not to be. We choose to be optimistic. So I wanted to hear from you, like what sort of trends or innovations, what keeps you optimistic? What gives you hope for the future?
And just one point before I answer that question, Satu, with the adaptation finance window, I should highlight that it's NDF that's going to be leading on the due diligence and on the point of acceleration and speed and scale. The Nordic donors came together to say, let's let a DFI that's actually funded by all of us do the due diligence. So I just want to say that's also a step forward for IMCA, is that we're outsourcing a lot of the speed, hopefully, to you, and that philanthropy can benefit from seeing the due diligence process and learn. In terms of, aside from being optimistic that now people are rapidly moving forward in coordinated, coherent way and providing the private sector some predictability, the other thing that I think is critical in building what I see as an ecosystem of confidence, besides coordination and partnerships, would be data. And I think today, we can be a little nervous about what's happening with AI, but we can also take that and see how we can use it for our own benefits. And there are uses for us on AI. We can use data to be predictive, to help us understand cash flows, to help investors understand if they're actually getting the impact indicators that they intend, and what interventions in terms of the development side are needed to essentially build that pipeline of companies for investors to come in. And so I think there's a lot of hope for us right now with the data access, as long as we are using it the right way. And that, I think, means that we also have to embrace AI and look for tools that we can build, because otherwise I am worried that, essentially people will use ChatGPT to figure out where to invest and then say, oh, we're doing impact investing in these places. And it's because they asked a random source. So I'm really hopeful to see in the next couple of years what tools are developed to make your life easier in order to do, as Stacey said, and accelerate our investments.
Yes, what I would like and what the trends are maybe are not the same. I would like to see more climate financing going to least developed countries and fragile states. I would like to see that we unlock private capital, not only to, but also within developing countries. And that we need more investments vehicles to increase participation by local investors and funds and businesses. Then I also have hope in partnerships, because we're a lot of different partners with different kind of mechanisms in order to attract financing. But we also have to have enabling conditions in the countries. And I think we have to, work together, because we all have different roles and mandates. And if we use those in a clever way, I think that would be good. And then one of my colleagues have put down as well that we need to see much more of data-driven monitoring and risk mitigation, because early-stage climate investments often suffers from lack of credible data on climate risk, carbon and environmental impact, and emerging technologies, as we said previously. And I also would like to say that NDF has a very important role to play in harmonizing us as donors. And yes, thank you.
Thank you, Louise. And then Stacy.
Okay, so I actually have a lot to be optimistic about. So let me start with data and analytics. So 10 years ago was when Mark Carney gave his speech at Lloyd's of London about the tragedy of horizons. At that time, there was no industry that existed that quantified climate-related financial risks. And today, there are hundreds of companies that help investors identify, assess, and quantify the financial aspects of climate change. And they do it in very different ways because the use cases are very different. They can do it for water, they can do it for storm, they can do it for heat, they can do it for asset managers, for pension funds, they can do it for banks, they can do it for private equity. But that industry did not exist 10 years ago. We need to use more of it in the diligence process, because it's one thing to set up a program and think about a kind of integrated resilience plan for a country, but when it comes to a project, the investors need to assess the project level risks, and the data is there to be able to identify, assess, quantify the financial risk from climate change. Once you do that, that informs how you can finance structure, and it informs how you might use different sources of blended capital. For me, that is an amazing innovation that doesn't get enough credit in our climate world. Literally none of those companies existed in 2015. That whole industry has grown. And we know some of the big names, so MSCI, First Street, there's a bunch out there. But that's really, really innovative and very, very helpful for the world. And AI is going to make it much better on that side. I'm also quite optimistic about the number, so I'm going to start macro and then one more micro. There's actually a lot of energy transition investment going in, even though the narrative and the headlines say otherwise. I have a Bloomberg data point. They just came out with their figures last week. More than $2 trillion last year in the energy transition was invested in the energy sector, in things that are counted as energy transition. There was only $3 trillion total in the energy space. So that's 2/3 of all investments in 2024 were in energy transition. Now, of course, it's Bloomberg. You've got to get under the numbers and figure out, like, are some of them kind of, things we might not like or things we would love? I don't know. But that's a pretty big number, and that made me optimistic coming into this COP, because we do have to adapt, and resilience is something we all need to get our hands around. So let me go down to the micro. Back to the kind of innovation, I'm seeing companies that are really looking to innovate around resilience in batteries, in water, in agriculture kind of management. That's super, super innovative. And what I'd love is that my organization and others come in to fund some of those early stage startups, because like with the data and analytics space, we're at the beginning of what we need to do for adaptation, and some of these industries absolutely need to be built, and they're built from these innovative ideas and those early stage startups.
Excellent. Okay, Sashi has one more.
Sorry, I really wanted to just squeeze this in if I could. Just in terms of being hopeful, because everything can seem sometimes gloomy with climate, is that as a personal story, I come from a global south country, Sri Lanka. I live in the global north. I'm sitting here at COP in discussions with donors. I see this powerful movement of integration, and actually integration leads to better solutions. So we're not just shoving north-north solutions anymore. We're looking at north to south, and we are talking about domestic mobilization of capital. There's $1.3 trillion sitting in the accounts of microfinance institutions that can be transferred to be more climate resilient, and they are at the forefront of doing this. So while we sit here and we need to work on the trillions that are to be moved, we should also look at what's on the ground now and how to make that adaptive. and listen to the solutions, as Louis said, from the ground up as well. And I think we're doing a better job every year in having those voices in these spaces.
Thank you, Sashi, and thank you, Stacy. Those were really, really very optimistic thoughts. So just to round us off on this wonderful discussion today, for me, what this discussion really reinforced my optimism. You really brought forward key points that I think we can all take with us. Collaboration and partnerships, taking that also beyond the talk, but to really kind of work together on how we can increase speed, go for scale by bringing together our different tools and different approaches in a coherent way. I think that's a really, really good source of optimism for us. Then you all talked about the use of data, use of technology, AI, in terms of like really taking forward or bringing that to the climate finance space and taking full advantage of those opportunities and again to increase impact and speed and scale. And then overall innovation and the kind of both like small scale, larger scale, and the incredible speed at which some of these innovations have moved, are moving, and what we can expect going forward. But then also how we can enhance and make the conditions better for those innovators and innovations to thrive and because really we don't have time to wait, we just need to keep working at it. Thank you very much for this discussion, all of you. Thank you for our audience. It's been fun talking to you today and looking forward to further conversations and enjoy the rest of your COP. Thank you.